Barbara. I think everyone has its Bible. We start from a chapter for St. Mark, brothers and sisters. No, that's wrong. I've actually written a whole book on religious talk, written in a way, and it would have been marvelous to try it here in this beautiful church. But my talk is an extremely boring talk, and it has nothing to do with the spirit of a place. And we will have to make an ad hoc spirit, so I hope at some point the choir will be there and someone will take the organ and the piano, and we'll have a decent ceremony. But in the meantime, I'm afraid you have to listen to my talk on the monadological principle. It's actually starting from a long work, Barbara alluded to it, which is the work I did in Paris' Invisible City, trying to convince people that it was possible to visualize in a different way the work of organizing. And if you remember, some of you might remember these images, I hope it's good enough, when you want to study, for instance, something as simple as where the classrooms are in an organization. This lady doesn't look outside of the whole school, she looks at this thing, which is a very small little pieces of paper on which the only thing which is important here is that she tags with the right coding, so that when students in the room, this is the école des mines, have the same sort of copy of the same organigram, and then can check it with the name and number which is on the room. And this circulation of immutable mobiles is what a lot of us do in organizing, and certainly what the people who organize this marvelous meeting have been doing. So it has been long work which has been done by many of you actually in organization study to try to use this very, very practical following up and tracing of intellectual technology in order to load organization study with a materiality that they never really had, because we were always sort of confusing the organizing movement with the organization as an entity already existing. And what I want to do in this talk is to use the same insight, but with a very new technique, and using the digital conversion, not to use the word revolution, in order to raise exactly the same question, but a very, very different set of data. I created in Sciences Po, since I'm now the Dean of Research, thanks to Barbara, who put me in the organization, I'm going to say accidental, but an exact word, accidental organizer. I created this media lab in order to get a feel for the digital data which are now accessible for raising the same question, and I did quite a lot of work, and that's where I will start from, on what I call mapping controversies using digital technique for creating what I call datascapes, controversial datascapes, and this is a learning and a teaching tool. And if so, those of you, some of you are interested, they can go to the sort of repository where all these sites are assembled. These are students, second year master students, and it's a lot of work, out of which I got some interesting, I find them interesting insight into the question that I will raise today with you. And of course, the main reason is that we are flooded with data. You might, of course, know Ngram, which is one of the new tools that Google developed here. I just tested it on Gabriel Tard and Émile Durkheim in French text since 1880. And as you see, actually, Tard has not been that ignored as much as people think. So what can we do with all this data? And in what way can we restate very classical question of social theory and organization theory using this mass of digital tools? This is the question I'm going to try to address with you. And I will have 4 points, since the aim is to reassemble organization. The first point, which is around the notion of profile. Profile is a word which is used extensively in digital techniques, and I think it reorganizes quite a lot of things that we have to reassemble. And using the notion of profile, I will go back to this very old question which has been at the heart of actor network theory, namely, do we need 2 levels, micro, macro, or 1 only, which is the flat argument that Barbara alluded to, which will make allow me to make the main point about monads, which is that there is actually another way of looking at organization where the whole is always smaller and not bigger than the part. And I will end up in a much more tentative aspect, trying to get at the visualizing argument. And the visualizing, of course, is interesting for me because we might have people here who already do these things and I need to know, and maybe at the end we can discuss. So this will be my sermon tonight. It would be immensely boring, but I didn't know we had been in this room. If not, I would have started something much more in a religious sense. So the first argument is hard to make on paper, but it's actually an experience we all have now that we are dealing with this digital search engine. So let me just point out one detail of our common experience in navigating data set. Again, I take the example of the Ngram because it has something frightening and very useful into it. This is a paper on cultural nomics. We talked with Deirdre about that yesterday. And the example they have is actually a very nice one. They tested on the 5 millionth book they have on Google the two expressions, the United States is, that is in blue, and the United States are, which is in red. And as you see, and which is of course a very classical question of political philosophy, of organization studies as well, is the United States an assemblage or is it a unity? So very classical question of political philosophy. And as you see, until basically 1920, the United States were a multiplicity of states, and the use even now of the United States as a unit, as a federal unit, is actually quite small compared to the multiplicity of the United States taken severally. So this is the sort of thing that can be done now. But that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is in the bottom, because when you click on the bottom, and we now all have this experience, you get to the individual item in the books. And if you click again, you get inside the very single words and sentences inside which the expression here in yellow, the United States is, or United States are, is actually lodged. So it means that the big divide that has divided all of us between the macro and the micro, the quantitative and the qualitative, receive now a very different answer if we are able in the same interface to navigate very quickly. And the whole argument here is quickly and easily between quantitative and qualitative argument. If it's slow, and that would be my argument today, if it's too slow, if it's difficult to do this movement, then the artifact of the micro-macro comes in. But if it's fast, it's much more difficult to sustain the artifact, and we can begin to think differently about the micro-macro and the quantitative-qualitative argument, because you can go back and forth very fast. Another example, which is taken from a company which is associated with the Media Lab, and it's an interface you can find, I'm sure, hundreds of them, so we are used to them very much, which is here, it's an automated analysis of a blogosphere with the usual quantitative tool on the right and on the top, which might mean something or not, depending on your interest in the quantitative statistics. But on the left side, under there, you have the individual blog, and when you click again, as we now always do, we get the individual blog out of which the data point on the right has been produced. So instead of having this usual division, are you a qualitativist or a quantitativist? Do you do fieldwork? Do you do interview on a little notebook? Or are you, on the contrary, a number cruncher? This question is completely moot now. We now have an interface where the comparison between qualitative and quantitative data is actually integrated. Right? Not integrated, but actually synoptically visible at once. There are lots of problems with those, there are lots of defects, nothing works very fine, but that's not my argument. My argument is raise a new question for us in order to understand what it is for an entity to have attributes. And that's what the point I want to make.